Today, I'm giving the most interesting brief of the entire week, hands down. So you guys are the lucky few to be here. It's going to be amazing, life-changing, all that stuff. It's going to be the best. So it's not really a traditional brief. It's not slides. It's more of a TED Talk-like format. So it's going to be like animations and just points on the screen and stuff. So you guys are lucky you're here because they told me with Teams, I think it's only getting the video. They can't even see the screen on the slide, so they're not even going to know what's showing at the same time. So. Today we're talking about RMF Red Pill, just my own personal observations from issues in the DoD's implementation of the risk management approach, just the things that I've seen over my years of the issues and maybe what could be done about making it better. I have my personal information up there because I'm not here on behalf, I am a civilian employee, but I'm not here on behalf of the command. I'm not speaking on behalf of Navy RMF or anything like that. It's just my personal observations that I'm sharing. I do have my work contact at the end though. And of course if anyone gets on Teams and you've ever seen that emoji, that's my Teams emoji, which I have been accused of actually making myself, which I did not. That is a real picture. All right, so Red Pill. So I had to add this. I've only given this brief one other time at a luncheon in May last year, and people didn't know what Red Pill was. So if you don't know what it is, it's from the movie Matrix, and he gives them a choice. If you take the red pill, you'll see the world as it is. You get to know the truth. But if you take the blue pill, you just get to go back to ignorance. So the point here is if you take the blue pill, you can go back to being ignorant and thinking that the problem is RMF itself and that risk management framework doesn't work and that it's not. Or you take the red pill and you find out the problem is actually us. The problem are the people that implemented risk management. It's not risk management itself. And because I don't have a screen or slide notes, I already messed up my intro. I was supposed to say, what if I told you, just like he does in the movie. I already forgot to do that. So I'm off to a great start. All right, so, not sure what's there we go. All right, so first just who I am, just real quick. I was born an Air Force dependent. I have an older brother I grew up with. His name's John. We're gonna talk about him again in a second. My dad was a 30-year Air Force OSI agent. He then went on to run DoDIG. My mom was a career civil servant, and if you've ever been hired in the civil service using something called Pathways, she actually wrote that law. That was her law. The last thing she did before she retired. I joined the Navy in '93. And then I only did one tour because my brother, who's older, I joined first, but he's older, and he is what we call the 5-0 sailor. That means he's like a perfect sailor, all right? So I couldn't stay in and have the family pictures. So I eventually did several jobs, got to NAVWAR in 2008. And I have two very grown kids. My son turns 29 next month. My daughter turns 24. And my beautiful wife, who was kind enough to talk to me this morning and tell me, settle down, I'm gonna be fine, don't worry about it. So, my brother is the Fleet Master Chief for U.S. Fleet Forces Command. So now you kind of get a sense of why I got out. I couldn't have that family photo where I'm an E6 and he's throwing out the first pitch at a Marlins game with Admiral Cottle, and meanwhile I'm just, I'm still getting busted down again or something. I don't know, whatever would have happened. It just clearly wasn't going to be in my cards. I had to get out. So, but that's my brother. Super proud of him. So I always work that in whenever I can because hopefully, next MCPON, if any of you are voting members or work for a voting member, don't forget it. So how do I know about RMF? So I've been doing it since about 2006. I worked at the DHS Finance Center. They were already on RMF well ahead of the DoD. But when I came to NAVWAR in 2008, they were obviously still doing DICAP or DITSCAP. We were just going to DICAP. So then I did create the Navy's DICAP template. So anyone who had made, if you know the CNA plans and the tables and stuff like that, if it had a border around the page, and I think if it said Bill Donnell was a creator because I used a Word document he had already had to edit, those were all the Navy DICAP templates I made. For a while, I was the ISSM for NMCI, OneNet, and Flank Speed. And in that role, we had about 1,100 ATO packages, which we eventually reduced down to 136 RMF packages in less than a year in a near automated fashion. All right, we reduced all of our ATO timelines by 80%. We implemented what's called the use case highway, which is in my backups. It's my one backup slide is a picture of what that use case highway is, just in case somebody wants to see what it is. But it's just a way to approach ATO approvals and how you do them all in parallel and how you can kind of cheat with EMAS to get all this stuff done. So we made a lot of changes. Linda Fulton here in the front row did all my work for me that whole time. So all these are really things she did. I just had the idea of doing it, but she made it all happen. Then we created an EMAS automation tool called Epic, which eventually became the RAF tool at NAVWAR. So it just automates everything in EMAS. Even though EMAS has a very limited API, we use screen scraping to go in and do everything. So we could program it in to say, go grab these 25 records, squeeze them together in the database, spit out the outputs that EMAS wants, import them in, and then that's how my new packages. So that's how I did the transition. So it was a year, but it was actually about like 7 months of preparing all that stuff, making everybody very nervous that we weren't going to make it, and then all of a sudden it all just started rolling in. And we have the only implementation of Conmon that I know on 400,000 assets. So whenever you're sleeping, 370 million STIGs are run automatically on NMCI, ingested into Splunk, compared to your EMAS record, and tells you if they're different compliances. If it's like, nope, on the network it's this, but on your EMAS package it's this, that's a delta. The only ones that I know of we do it with a free tool called Evaluate STIG from NavC. It's a PowerShell script, runs on Windows and Linux. It is amazing, and we have a little custom output for it to make it all happen, because obviously when you have 400,000 outputs, you can't just take pure CKLs, that would be too much bandwidth. But, and then I did win the Navy Civilian Service Medal in 23 and the Milner Award in 2024. The Milner Award, pretty cool. It's like a big, heavy piece of glass thing. I wasn't expecting that, so that was kind of cool. All right, so now, the ethos of the brief, all right? If I could summarize DoD's approach to risk management, or NIST and everybody's risk management framework for the DoD, if I had to give it a statement, like what is probably the guiding principle of it? And this is the quote that I thought it fit the best, right? Hey, if it seems too simple, why don't we just make it more complicated? And we'll just keep doing that until eventually it works. It's like a beatings will continue until, cyber improves or something. Aaron Alston's the author of the Star Wars books, if you don't know the name. All right, so, and I had an updated slide, and we got a neat meme there, but I didn't get it in, so let's do a quick risk management primer, all right? So this is really a primer on enterprise risk management. And so this is really, all I'm doing here is I'm gonna drive home, this is what the DoD was sold on. Like, hey, this is what industry does. They do enterprise risk management, and it works for them, and they save money, and so then the DoD should be able to save money. So they identify, assess, manage their risks, right? They do it based on what risks prevent them from achieving their mission, right? And then they go through and they reduce those risks. That, very simple and plain laid out, right? I mean, very easy to understand. What are your risks? What prevents you from doing your mission or whatever your business unit's goals and objectives are? How can we make that better? And we're gonna compare that to DoD in a second. So the ERM steps are, obviously, you identify risks, you assess each risk for likelihood, you determine the severity of the risk. If you work in RMF, by the way, you're seeing a pattern here that everything is about the word risk right now. Risk, risk, risk. All right, and maybe if you work in RMF, you're thinking, well, our first 3 steps do not have the word risk in it. All right, then you select your controls to mitigate the risk. Now this is now where the head starts popping off on DoD people. Like, no, what are you talking about? You select controls first. And this is kind of one of the points I'm getting at. Enterprise risk management, you start with the risk to your mission, and then you select controls to monitor that risk or to mitigate it. We just start with a bunch of controls, and then we'll get to how we end up at the end. And then, of course, monitor risk. Everybody does the monitoring risk. All right? Now the DoD's definition. All right, so compared to that enterprise risk management, how simple that was. What do we have here? Basically, this is something that says, oh, RMF, yeah, that's 3,600 pages of PhD dissertations wrapped up into these manuals. Why don't you guys go read it and figure it out then? All right, not the same ethos as ERM. Doesn't have that simpleness to it. And that's exactly how they all read. They all read just massively, massively complicated. And so now I want to do a quick comparison of, no, I'm not. I'm doing that next. So I'm going to start about the issues. So I have 7 issues, although I think I numbered them 6. I found out an error. I fixed it this morning, but I didn't get the updated slides in. But there is an error. There is an error in there. I'll point it out for you so you don't have to look for it. So 853 itself is the actual problem. So here we are, ERM versus RMF, all right? ERM is a risk-based approach per risk, like we just saw. The whole steps were risk, 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 control the risk, monitor the risk, right? All risk. So it's a per risk approach, where we have a NIST-based approach per system, right? We're looking at systems, not risks. We're looking at what's our system, what's the status of this system, how many findings does this system have? And then it's a NIST-based process too. It's more of a process approach, where ERM focuses on risks, we focus on process and paperwork. All right, so we're not talking about risk. We're talking about, hey, you gotta write all this stuff down. You gotta go through all these steps. You got all these things. Well, how do you end up with all this complication? How do we end up with these huge, huge documents that are hard to understand? So when we compare them, if you look at each of these steps together, and I'm sorry if I talk too fast, every now and then I'll try to control myself. I gotta slow back down because I start running. So we're gonna look, these steps do not align. So this is supposed to be the DoD's adoption of enterprise risk management, and yet there is no prepare in ERM. There is no select in ERM, technically, not the way, or categorize. There is no select, not in the way that we do it, but there is an implement. And basically our implement phase is all those other things together. The implement is the thing. That's the actual risk management. That's where the work is supposed to occur. right? That's the engineering step, and we're going to get into that. That's another issue. That's going to be one of our future issues in a minute. And then they don't do an assess. Now they assess the risk, but it's not like our assessment. You know, ours is this third-party assessment of if you filled your paperwork out right, not a third-party assessment of the mission risk and your risk and what you present to the risk of that mission. That's not what we do. We assess your paperwork and assess your mitigations, and if you missed too many things or if you missed a document, then it goes back, right? And then of course they do both monitor, so there's a match. So that's at least that one's easy. Right? Everyone's got to say monitor. But again, it's a NIST process and paperwork-based approach. It's not a risk-based approach. Now, when you read those descriptions, though, NIST actually has really good descriptions in each of those steps, and they do kind of say that, but that's not actually how it works. So they'll say things like in select. You select the controls and tailor them down to the minimum required to manage your risk. But we all know we don't do that. 1253 tells you, here's your 500 or 700 controls that you have to do. You know, there's no, you can tailor after that, but you're still spending money on it. We're going to get on that part too. All right, and how do we get with it? These are the guys that wrote it. This is how you ended up with the NIST 800 series, all right? There's a bunch of PhDs, and that's why they keep coming up with new ones, because there's some new guy coming up, and he wants to get his PhD, and he's got to defend it, but you can't if you're just writing the same old thing, so no, I got to do a little different, and I'm going to call it cybersecurity framework now, and I'm going to change the numbers, but it's basically the same thing. I'm just going to make it a little harder to follow. You know, so this just, to me, every time I read a NIST document, it is, I mean, they even say abstract on the front, just like a dissertation does. I mean, to me, they just read like dissertations. They're not some plain thing that you can then give to, I don't know how many cyber people there are just in the Navy alone, let's say 30,000, like all 30,000 are getting these 3,600 pages and having to read it all and understand what it means. It's just not easy to implement. The thing's just too complicated to understand. So I'm gonna do a quick look here. So DIACAP, obviously, now I don't really know the source. I didn't go look it up. I imagine it was some chief warrant officer, commander, or something that translated up the Rainbow series for 8,500, right? That was signed out. And we all used that for a while. Then eventually we turned it over to Lambda, and they came up with our RMF stuff. So here's kind of a comparison of a MAC 2 sensitive in DIACAP to an RMF mod with privacy. And you can see the number increase, right? Just the assessments of the assessment procedures alone, what used to be fine to assess my identification and authorization, suddenly I need 9 times more, 8 times more, whatever that is for the math people. I need 8 times more than I had before to ask the same question. Do you have a weak password? You know, the same question, but no, we're just adding more and more complexity. In the Navy, we call this nuking out, right? People nuke things out when they just go deeper and deeper. People look at something sometimes and say, okay, how can I make this simpler? Or they look at it and say, what if I can dive deeper? What's the definition of is? Maybe I can write a whole nother subset of enhancements just based on that. I feel like that's what keeps happening with the NIST stuff. So the 853A alone contains 1,404 assessment procedures. That's just if you count all of them together. And they really thought that was going to save money, that this was their answer to say, oh yeah, you're going to save money by this. Well, all we'll do is 8x the number of answers you have to give, and then we're going to save money. It didn't stop there. I'm going to show you how it actually got worse in a minute. But some of you might be thinking, well, Sean, Rev 5 is out. Doesn't Rev 5 make things better? And you know what? Actually, Rev 5 actually has a little improvement. There are less controls. That's good. There are less enhancements. So we're getting somewhere. And then we get to the assessment procedures. And they seem to have told the DoD with their CCIs, hey, hold my beer. I can one-up you. I got this. Right? And so now they got, what I'm counting is 4,194. I haven't read them all. There are some, I took out the ones that say withdrawal or withdrawn or determine if, but you know, maybe there's a few other in there that don't belong, but there's a lot now. It's definitely there's a lot more than 1,400. And so that's what's coming up in Rev 5, which the Navy we're not doing yet, but that's what's on our way. But don't worry, if you were working, these Lambda did not write you a mapping between the two. So you can't go from Rev 4 to Rev 5. There is no mapping, all right? There's no mapping. Kind of a mapping, but no mapping. They actually, what they did was reuse the same controls, but use text from an old control that was in a different one. So AC211 might still be AC211, but it now has the text from AC25, or it might just be new text altogether. There is no mapping between them. Except, fortunately, even though I don't like CCIs, the CCIs do map to both revs. So if you guys, when we do migrate, CCI will luckily be our path that we migrate from one version to another. It seems to be the only key field I can find that goes between the two. Even though I haven't seen an updated CCI list. But like I said, I hate CCIs. All right? CCIs are the bane of everybody's existence. They suck. So what if I told you the DoD doesn't even care about RMF controls, right? We're supposed to care about risk management and controls. It's all supposed to be about controls. You got control baseline and everything. but they don't care about controls. When you go into EMAS, you don't answer controls, you answer CCIs, or as EMAS calls them, assessment procedures, the EMAS AP, right? SAC-2.1. That's an assessment procedure. So that's actually what you answered. So DoD, you're supposed to answer those CCIs. And I know people here or probably have read them and see what they look like. So we're going to go over that. So here's a control. That's a beautiful thing. Look at this thing. This is gorgeous. I just fill in the blank. Fill in the blank. I got to document something. I got to define something else. That's pretty easy to follow, right? Well, then the DoD was like, no, that's too much. Let me do this. I'm going to take that first one that was a fill in the blank that somebody could have just clicked on and filled in. I'm instead going to make it this repetitive wording statements that when you read them, and there's 2,900 of them, and you go over and over and over, and they all look like this. And I can't even, honestly, I can't tell the difference between the first two. I know they came from AC5A. I don't know what the difference is there. I don't know what that's telling me, and that's how most people feel. When you read a CCI twice, you get two different definitions. And when the next guy does it, they do the same thing. They are just the worst. So, I did forget to say, I'm sorry, I forgot to mention. So NIST is actually already designed for this. So what happened is the DoD said, well, these are great, but I have some extra requirements. There's things the DoD wants that is not covered in the NIST framework. Well, NIST would tell you, great, add an enhancement, right? If it was AC5 ABC, I just need a DoD D or an AC5 parenthesis 1 just for the DoD. That's an enhancement. That's what we should have done. But instead, we did the CCIs for some reason. So now I've taken AC5, which has no DoD enhancement on it. You can see there's no extra DoD requirement there. But we just made answering that what was a simple control, we've made it much harder now, even though there's no DoD expansion on it. There's no extra requirement there. All right, so of course the CCI numbers mean nothing. At least the EMAS APs are good. You can tell it's AC5, but these things don't mean anything. And I don't know why they didn't just do AC 5.1 like EMAS did. That was really a much better approach. But as anybody probably knows, you read these and they're just repetitive, repetitive, repetitive. And this is what it feels like every time you read them. And I've had to read all of them several times on NMCI because we had to define inheritance for the enterprise. We had to assign every CCI to people and to CLINs, and so we've read them many times, and you get different ideas. Each time you read one, I say, why was I thinking that? Why did I let them have that? I have no idea why I gave that to them. So that's the problem with ambiguous statements like that are just too fuzzy and too hard to fill out. All right, so I think we kind of covered it a little, the assessment procedure growth. And DICAP, there was a total of 173. And NIST now, in the current Rev 4, has 1,404, and then the DoD CCIs are 2,925. All right, so don't worry. RMF's going to save you money, right? Don't forget, you're going to save money. That's a lot cheaper to fill out 2,925 repetitive statements than to answer the 173 simple questions we used to have. All right, so now we get a little sense. Issue 3, the implementation. So everything needs a rollout plan, right? And RMF's no different. It had a DoD rollout plan. That plan was, we're all in, right? Everything. So this is what is in, there's 18 control families, 260 controls, blah, 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 right? How much of those were required on the first day? What was our implementation plan? Anyone remember? Yeah, I should have said, you feel free to yell out. I should have said that. All of them. All of them were required on day 1. Literally on the first day, everything was required. There was no attempt to make a SANS top 20 like implementation, like 1 through 10 for your first year of RMF, 11 through 15 for your second year, just anything like that. Now I know they don't do SANS top 20 anymore. It's now CIS top 18, but they don't have a nice graphic like this, so I'm just gonna keep using SANS top 20 to get the point across. But so there was no implementation, there was no rollout of how to move people along. So what happens when you tell a program office it has to deploy, you can't have an ATO until you answer the 2,900 questions. And you gotta do them now. I need all those answers right now, and I need all that documentation right now. So you can start to imagine what starts to happen. People start looking for templates. People start looking for what other people did and where that leads to. Instead of having something where the whole enterprise or everyone out there was able to focus on, hey, it's hardware month. Everyone report, what's your assets? How do you monitor them? How do you report on them? Get it done, and then go to the next one. What's your software? And then it's the only thing you got to answer. If you got a DICAP ATO, great, you already got an ATO. Now you will get an RMF ATO as soon as you answer these first 2 items or something like that. Just anything like that would have been much better than just saying, I don't have any authority that says you don't have to do them all, so now you got to do them all. The Army, if you're not aware, did just sign in November an updated policy for critical controls. It is 52 controls and enhancements, and that is now all they require to get your ATO. The rest of it is all considered, as you know, ancillary documentation. I don't need to know who the janitor's name on Wednesday is to get an ATO. There's probably a CCI for that. I'm being funny, but I mean, there probably is one. There's so many things in there. But now the Army is down to 52. It's 42 controls and 10 enhancements, 52 total. And that's how the Army's given ATOs now. All right, issue 3, which if you were looking for the error, you just found it, is I put number 3 twice. So that's how I make the brief feel shorter. It's definitely not my voice. I apologize. I don't sound like Barry White or anything. It's just the way I am. All right, so this is the engineering SDLC V. If anyone in NavWar has ever seen the system engineering V, this is it laid flat. And what I'm going to say, put the time scale, but not really. But if you can see on the bottom there, step 1, step 2, and 4 and 5 are those things on the outside. What this is supposed to show is the eye of Soren can't really see step 3 because there's a mountain in the way. And that's exactly been our approach the entire time. Everything is about step 1, 2, 4, and 5. Everything's about, what template do I need for step 2? Do I need a categorization form? You don't have the right SAP template. Why does the NAO take 3 weeks? Well, you took 4 years to build it. Is 3 weeks really blowing your timeline? But nobody looks at RMF like this. Everyone thinks RMF is an ATO. It's not. An ATO takes 45 days. RMF ATOs take 45 days. Why? Because it's just the approval at the end of your engineering effort. You've already built it. You've written your answers down. You've done your testing. That's all engineering. That's implement. That's your engineering work. That takes years. You're working on that the whole time. You're supposed to be writing down your answers. You're supposed to be gathering your test results. You're making your package. That's implement. The approval, you just go to the SCA and you go to the NAO. The NAO takes 3 weeks. That's your approval. They're just reviewing everything you did in step 3. The problem is we've spent, I don't know how long we've been doing RMF now, 8 years or something. I don't know. We spent the last 6 years focusing only on steps 1, 2, 4, and 5. So NavWar, I don't know if other people are, but we are definitely out in front. We had our first step 3 summit. No one's allowed to talk about 1, 2, 4, or 5. Everything is about engineering. How do we get engineering answers? How do we make it easy on people for engineering? So I'll give an example of how the engineering makes a big difference. Everyone knows that the STIGs say there's a certain type of auditing you have to have, right? We'll say like account creation, account deletion, account lock, something like that, right? And those have event IDs defined, all right? And 95% of our networks are running the same stuff. Windows, Linux, Nginx, IIS, Oracle, Postgres, right? Those all have event IDs for everything I just said. Where's the list? Where's the engineering list that everybody can go to? Who can go get that list of event IDs? Nobody has it because there's zero focus on the actual engineering of RMF and cybersecurity. Everybody's been focused on the approval process. The 3 weeks at the NAO is what everybody is worried about. Meanwhile, the engineers, they have to implement this stuff. You have to capture those audits from each technology you have, and nobody's telling them what the event IDs are. But whatever Project A does it, and they write it down, and then Project B never finds out what Project A wrote down, and they got to do it again. If everyone's running Windows, how come there's not a repository of all Windows event IDs? Or for whatever controls are technical, those should all be predefined for us. That's an engineering function. That's how you make it easier on the engineers. And you got to give them an actual RMF tool, right? Because we don't have one. We have no RMF tool. As in, RMF is cyber from the beginning. It's engineering cyber in from the start, and we don't have one. What we do have is EMAS. And you're probably saying, well, EMAS is an RMF tool, right? It is not. EMAS is an inheritance tool. It was made for inheritance. It was sold on inheritance. Inheritance, you'll be able to do inheritance. That's what was supposed to change the world. It has zero engineering features. So if any EMAS user here, think in your mind, would you give your engineer access to EMAS to answer CCIs? Could they even translate their design into that? They can't. Right? There's no RTM feature, there's no engineering feature, there's no capture, there's no fill in the blank for them. You can't give them those 3,000 CCIs, they're building something. So what it is a die-cap tool. It was built for die-cap. And of course, I'm about to show how we can prove that. But RMF-wise, I know there's other RMF tools. Definitely the best one I ever saw was the first one I saw, which was a KPMG tool built on ServiceNow. And it was actually the thing that once I saw it, I was like, oh, I totally understand how to answer controls, where you would click on that fill in the blank, and it would have you select, if you had Windows, Oracle, and IIS in your system, it would have you select that one, and then put the answer in for that tech. and then you select the next technology and put the answer in for that one. And that's what we sorely need, is something that helps users walk through those answers. Because a TR export, the test results export from EMAS, is not the thing. That is absolutely not. So I apologize. When I made this brief, it was a small room, and there was a big screen projector, and now it's kind of small, so I don't know if y'all can see that. But over here, we see we got 2 levels, all right? Now, if anyone who uses EMAS knows that you have controls, which is AC18, and enhancements, which is AC18.1. The problem is EMAS treats those both as controls. Everybody says, I have 700 controls. You don't have 700 controls. You have 206 or 203, and then you got another 200 and something enhancements for it. But this is a 2-layer system. So who remembers how many layers there were in DIACAP, right? There was 2. You had III1 and then III11 and 12. So it's the same tool from DIACAP. It's not an RMF tool. If it was an RMF tool, it would look like this other side. There would be 3 layers. I really hope I don't fall off, by the way. That would make for a great video, though. There would be 3 layers. You'd have a control level, an enhancement level, and then the AP level below that. It's a 3-level system: control, enhancement, and assessment. And so it's not a 3-level system. So another thing this causes is everyone gets a risk assessment from the SCA, right? That risk assessment, per NIST guidance, is a risk of controls. You're only supposed to assess the risk of your controls, all right? So what does that mean? If I just told you, you have 206 controls, but they've added 230 enhancements at the control level, their system now requires risk assessments on all the enhancements. The validator, the SCALs, and the SCA now have twice the work to do a risk assessment because they're doing risk assessments on enhancements, and they're not supposed to. I can't see what that is. AC 18.1 is not supposed to get a risk assessment. It's supposed to be part of AC 18. So that's an example I have for how it's not an RMF tool. So getting one, obviously, getting the engineers to answer it first is the solution for all of us. And turning these things into RTM-like systems with pre-reported answers of the detailed technology is how we get them off and running. All right, risk tolerance, this is my funnest part. Actually, issue number 6 too, so if you're counting the real count instead of the fake count that I messed up. That's my favorite part of this, by the way, favorite part, is risk appetite versus risk tolerance. And I like the example they gave here, all right? If you're driving under 70 miles an hour, you're not gonna get a speeding ticket. Now, I know somebody out there is like, weather conditions and flow of traffic. Okay, but generally, 99.8% of the time, you're not gonna get a ticket. You're driving under the speed limit, right? So if you should feel safe. Now, does the DoD have a risk appetite? And my posit is no, we don't. If you are very low, or moderate, you are under the threshold for an authorization. But they still review everything. Everything still gets reviewed. There is no risk appetite. Nobody says, as long as you're driving under the speed limit, you can get through. As soon as I come up and say, hey, I'm under the speed limit, they say, well, pull over here, I'm gonna measure you, right? So that's a bit of a trust system issue, but still it points out how DoD doesn't have a risk appetite. There's no level, as long as you're at this level, we don't even review your stuff. They still review all of it. Think about non-applicable controls. Those are reviewed in your annual, or triannual at least. I'm not sure if they're in the annual security review. FAO people could tell me. But they're reviewed in your triannual. But they're NA. I'm supposed to tailor them out. In NIST, when you tailor something out, you're not supposed to then keep answering why you tailored it out all the time. You can reassess on whether it needs to be added, but technically the rule says you're supposed to reassess all controls to see if you need something added. So why am I spending money on NAs that I've already NA'd? I'm spending money on stuff I shouldn't have to. And why am I spending money when I have a risk when I have something that's within what reportedly is my risk appetite? Now, I also don't think we have unacceptable risk, by the way. So we're going to go over that one right now too. So I think all we have is a risk tolerance. That's what the DoD has. We have a risk tolerance. So I'm going to try to illustrate this. So how many Cat 1s can I have on the network? Anyone can feel free to lay out. Okay, my man back there saying 0. And how many secret documents can I lose? Anyone? How am I going to lose? 0, right? Is the answer to both of those actually 0? We have spillage procedures for a reason, right? Things happen. CVEs come out. The system's already on the network. These things happen. That's what the whole monitoring part is for. But the problem is cyber has that mindset that the answer is 0, and the answer is not 0. And if you were doing a real risk-based scenario, like a battle plan, that number is not 0. They can't plan. You can't plan that way. That's why they surround the carrier. It's all about the carrier. What does it take to make that thing survive? right? There's a reason a sub is trailing up. There's a reason there's a plane flying overhead looking for other stuff. Everything is a risk-based decision, and they deploy those frigates, destroyers, cruisers, subs, and planes, and everything else, and ARGs. They deploy all that with that express purpose. They don't think the risk is zero because they put CWIS on the carrier or something. You get what I'm saying? So it's just in cyber, they tend not to think that way. They tend to think, no, the answer is zero. I used to know a guy who would tell projects, it's a cat zero, it's not going to happen. I thought it was the dumbest thing I ever heard. Of course it's going to happen, right? It happens all the time. You can't stop it. You have to prepare for it, but it's a mentality shift. So when you have this extreme risk tolerance, you end up with a very low AO signs, right? Everyone knows, if you work in DoD RMF, AO signs, that's in the 8510 instruction. And then if it's high, very high, the CIO signs, all right? So is that a risk tolerance? Is there an unacceptable risk? Can I even say high and very high is an unacceptable risk? All I have is a bureaucratic system where somebody else signs, right? Brian Marsh, our former Navor Chang, used to say, everybody gets an ATO, just sometimes somebody else has to sign for it, right? So that means we don't have risk appetite because they got to review everything, and we don't have unacceptable risk because you could just get somebody else to sign something that says it's okay. So all we actually have is risk tolerance. And is that tolerance defined? Well, it's defined here. So does anyone think that is a communicated risk tolerance to programs? Or do you think it's preset settings based on DITSCAP and DICAP? The winner is DITSCAP DICAP. It's the same level. Now we call it moderate now instead of medium, so yay, risk management, right? We did it. we're really saving money now. And what you can't see in the bottom lower corner are mission areas. And that's how it's supposed to be, right? It's supposed to be a risk based on your mission risk. So I'm a WMA system on this mission. What is the risk? Is it acceptable or not? Mission areas are supposed to be defining the risk and publishing that risk. And then some mission area might have a different risk based on the connectivity of the platform or something else. But obviously none of that comes into play. There's no calculus for any of that in anything that we do. All right, issue 6/7 for real. Con-modded session. This is where I think this is where I had my great meme. It's from the Saturday Night Live where you need more cowbell, but it says needs more con-mon. So that was another thing Brian Marsh said. So I wrote this whole beautiful strategy for NMCI. It was great. It's the best thing ever. And I gave it to him. He reads it. And all he does is kicks it back and says, needs more con-mon. That's all he said. So I literally just, probably not me, but Linda does all my work. Linda went through and just added con-mon everywhere, like we could get away with it. Sent it back to him with no other changes. He's like, perfect. This is great. So that's why I thought the guy with the cowbell like a perfect meme. It's an obsession with the term con-mon, but not actually doing continuous monitoring. Because continuous monitoring would have to be understanding what a control is that you monitor. It is not an RMF control. RMF controls are requirements. Those should go into an RTM for your engineers to answer. A control for con-mon is the C in like Lean Six Sigma DMAIC. They do a process improvement, and then you're supposed to monitor that process to make sure those people don't start doing it the old way again, right? How do you know? When I worked at the finance center, I was doing Lean Six Sigma. We got these people, well, I'll make the numbers up. They used to process 10 a month. Now they process 100 a month, all right? So that's now the new baseline. And so what you do is you set those baselines in the upper lower limits. Well, maybe they can go to 120 or down to 80 or something like that, but anything beyond that, something's up. Maybe they're going back to their old ways, maybe they're gun decking if they're processing too many. Same thing here. So let's imagine this is like denial of service attacks per minute on NMCI, all right? That's what we got in the middle is a security control feed, right? So there's several CCIs that talk about denial of service and identifying the tool for the denial of service, identifying your risk of what your threat might be, and there's a whole bunch of them. But it comes down to a control monitor designed for all those controls. So each one would not be a control you monitor. This is my control that satisfies the requirements for denial of service, all right? And to build this, I do have to know all those answers. I have to know what my tools are and what kind of denial of service threats I have. But the whole point here is I'm not supposed to spend money on any of that, all right? Goes back to that Cat Zero and spillage thing. It's okay. It's going to happen. People are going to do denial of service attacks on NMCI. There's hundreds of thousands of them an hour, all right? It's going to happen. But you don't care unless it goes too low, all right? That might be a reason to call. Maybe they got in. Like you're knocking on the door, and suddenly the door opens. Okay, that could be an indication. Or if it goes too high, that means somebody could be attacking and they're trying to distract us. We need to queue up NCDoc, call a theoretical offensive cyber team, anything like that. So this is the other way Conmon is supposed to save you money. You're supposed to let go of stuff. If I process, NESD, let's say, there are tickets or something. They create accounts or they disable accounts and enable accounts. That's a great feed to go look at because it tells you if there's too many accounts being locked in or out. Now, the point is 100 account resets a day is probably normal. I don't know what it is, I'm making it up. But let's say it's 100 a day, that's normal. So you can't have that no cat one mentality. It's like, okay, 100 is fine, that's fine. But if there's 500 account resets in a day, that seems kind of weird, right? Something's up, something might be up. And that's the whole point of these feeds. And talking about that, I will say, if you guys have heard of a compensating control, where in a best example I give is in financial accounting, they call, if somebody wants to know, they have to, what do you call it? When you reconcile invoices with orders. Let's say their order system can't do that, but the warehouse system does. Shipping, receiving has both, right? So instead of looking, they don't query the order system to make this, they query the shipping, receiving system. That's their compensating control. It's where I'm going to get the data instead of where I thought I was going to. I thought I was going to get it here, and I'm not. I'm going to get it from over here. All right. So the feeds are not defined. Why are they not defined? No focus on step 3. Everyone's so focused on 1, 2, 4, and 5, and trying to squeeze another 3-hour savings out of the NAO's process. All right. So issue wrap up, which only has 6. That's the other error. Is one of them didn't quite make it into there. But I think it's the focus on process is the one missing there. Now, so 853 is too big and complicated. The CCIs double what already made everything hard, and now Rev 5 is doubling down on that, right? Lambda is not going to be outdone. They are going to win those games. What are the games? I should have looked that up. What were those games called? Does anyone remember? Revenge of Nerds, what the games were that they were doing? Greek games. All right, thank you. All right, so the Greek game, no phased implementation, which it is never too late to do. It is never too late to come up with a plan to say, this is what, if you answer these, let's take that Army document, you answer these controls, you can have whatever answers you want. But I get my ATOs now the same way I did in DISCAP, the same way I did in DICAP, STIGs and ACAS, right? So give me my STIGs and ACAS and my 52 critical controls I copied from the Army, and you're in. I don't care what the other ones say. But in year 1, you're going to have to do these other 5, and in year 2, you do these other 5. It's never too late, especially now with FAO control, where they can actually define their own authorizations and what they require for an authorization, including time-based triggers. But I won't go into that. I was going to add that one. All right, so I did have one bonus, just in case there's vendors here. I just want to take the chance to talk about this because it's one of those passions of mine. Vendors may not know there is a vendor STIG development process with DISA. If you get a government person to sponsor you through, DISA will work with you to create yourself a STIG. And why stop at a STIG? Why not just go ahead and make yourself a whole RMF package that people can use, right? Why would vendors not have that available already? So I want you to picture yourself. You're a vendor, and there's 2 products. You and this competitor. You both do document management, right? But one of you has a STIG from DISA's right there on cyber.mil, and they're giving you this whole TR import ready to go right into your EMAS record, and everything's good. The other one's saying, well, I can sell you professional services. Which one's the government going to pick, right? And I did forget to say one thing. From a government perspective, if your software, going to make it up, is $100,000, right? If it has no STIGs, the government then has to use our ISSEs to go and design those STIGs. So you're going to you're probably based on Tomcat, Nginx, Postgres, all these normal things anyway, but there might be some weird stuff in there too. So what the government hears is $100,000 plus $250,000 for a government ISSE and FTE to do the package for you to get an authorization. That's the biggest hurdle, I think, to sales, is that it is to the government, every new product. That's why switching is so hard, because the new products mean a whole new authorization, and they have they're not giving me anything to make that easy. I would be given a TR import and a STIG file and all the exact procedures on how to evaluate I'm going to make it up, Cisco, they have some web thing with a bunch of settings, and we had to go through each one to find out, okay, how do I limit SSH timeouts? Not in Cisco devices, but in the web console thing. I can't remember what that thing is called, but they had no STIG for it. All right, so that just repeats itself over and over. So if I could foot stomp something for any vendors in the crowd, please give yourself the advantage. If you have a STIG on cyber.mil and your competitor doesn't, government's going to pick the one with a STIG there, and they're all going to say, well, it's got a STIG. A STIG means a guaranteed ATO. Guaranteed ATO means I can buy it. because the way it works is you got to buy it before you can get an ATO for it. Can't get an ATO until it's in datums. Can't buy it in datums until it's approved. So just that process. All right, and then I think that's it for me. I did have, oh yeah, guaranteed ATO. There we go. I had a question slide here that I did. It was in my trainings. I love it, so I want to get credit for my meme anyway. It was Rambo shooting, and it was fantastic. It said questions. It's just Rambo shooting in the air. I thought it was great. I just didn't get to use it now, but it would have been nice if it was up there. All right, so that is my spiel. That is my, now these are not all issues. I know there's a lot of things we could all talk about. There's little nuanced things for everything, even like I mentioned event-based triggers and time-based triggers, a change the NavWar FAO has recently made to our baseline change process. If you read NIST, I'll just voice this over. If you read NIST, it gives the authorizing official the ability to define those triggers. Now, if you deal with the NAO, they define those as use cases. They have a use case memo. Those are their event-based triggers. The AO, meaning the FAO, is allowed to define their own. Those can be none, all right? The world is your FAO's oyster. They do not have to stick with that. The AO decides what the event and time-based triggers are. Now, you can't change time-based triggers past 8510 because that is the overarching guidance. It does say ASR, it says 3-year reauthorizations, but NavWar has plenty of processes for that stuff too, but just something to think about. Those are the other kind of things. There's all these little things that if we really did RMF right, if we really did it the way NIST wrote it, putting aside the Lambda assessment procedures, if we really did it, there's a lot of opportunity hidden inside of it. And that's it, and I'll take any questions if I know the answer and you're gonna agree with me. All right. Should we call Derek? We should force Derek to answer something. All right. Yes, please. Somebody's always got to go first.
Hi, Sean. My name is Maria Miller. I am the ANA lead at NSWC Corona. Woo! I guess I had a couple of questions or comments for you. In your intro, you mentioned how you consolidated a whole bunch of packages down into just a handful. I assume using EMAS. How were you able to, within that one tool, one record, consolidate inputs for different systems, or how did you do that? Because we have something similar. We call them subsystems within one package, but we're still addressing CCIs for each of the subsystems all in one record, so it all gets squished in EMAS and it's kind of difficult to manage. So how did you work through that?
Same way. One entry. So what we did is, you are correct. What you're saying is exactly correct. You still need a CCI per CCI answer for all, let's take our site packages. We average about like 25 sites packages were put into a single site package. So if you look in the TR, in the results field, there was an entry for every one of the originating packages. So I had compliant, non-compliant, compliant, compliant, non-compliant, compliant.
Yeah.
And then the database, the Epic database, would see that and say, if there's any one non-compliant, the whole thing's non-compliant.
Yeah,
and that's how we did it, and then imported. So you would have to look into those results. But you are correct. The work doesn't change. And that was an important message we had to drumbeat that, or foot stomp that too. The amount of work doesn't change just because I consolidated it. It does allow me to do a whole bunch of other fun stuff with use cases in my use case highway, but it does not change. Well, I guess I could put that up there, I think. No, that's my contact, that one. So we could do all kinds of fun stuff with that thing, but with one package. It allowed us to, basically you can put all kinds of changes into that one now, and I didn't have, and then it just takes away a lot of people's excuses that, oh, I'm working on 8 packages at the same time. Now they're only working on 1, but it is still 8 times the work.
Right, right. And what we have found is that not everybody takes it as seriously as they should. So I have 7 inputs for everything, and I've got 6, but that 7th system owner is just taking forever and holding down the entire package.
Yes. Yes, we had a similar thing. Circuits used to be inside of our site packages, and that's a huge risk because the same thing in ISSM for NSWC could just not send us something in. And if that site package expired, all the circuits would get cut off. Like JFHU DoD does not care. They would unplug Norfolk Navy Base. They don't call anybody, they just unplug it. All right? So we separated circuits out from the sites for exactly that reason. And then made a custom design, so if anyone has circuits, we have an NMCI called Linda Fulton. She has a specially designed circuit package, has like 70 assessment procedures in it or something like that. Always guaranteed approved, always guaranteed renewal, never fails. Circuits never at risk.
Okay.
All right, you said you had a second question?
Yes. Your timeline, you mentioned 45 days to ATO. What exactly is that based on, and what is day one? What is your starting point when you submit, or are you also including the preparation of the package in those 45 days?
I am only concluding the submit, because an ATO is the approval. It's not, all that was still, the engineering is required, right? And there's actually other approvals. There's those special approvals besides ATOs out there too, but yes, the engineering is still the thing that's required. But yes, I'm talking about from submit. So if you back it up, the NAO wants 3 weeks, the SCA wants 10 days, I think. The validators get, depending on the size of the system, that one can kind of change. So you see where the 45-day rule kind of comes in. But what it does, the reason why it was important in MCI was to drive the point home to everybody that this thing is decided if it's going to be issued in your engineering event, not in my ATO. But what happens is engineering is late, late, late. They're always late. They're a year late. And all they say is, all they report to leadership at the PMRs is, well, I'm still working on the ATO. No, you're not. It's not built yet. You're not where the ATO hasn't been submitted. You haven't sent anything in. You're still engineering. So we need to change that messaging and just tell everybody, ATOs take 45 days. It's just an approval process. Go focus on your engineering.
Right. And then as far as in the engineering, when we're talking about step 3 and we go and sit down with folks and ask them, how is your system put together? Ideally, to answer a lot of these, where's your documentation for your access control? Things like that. What we find most of the time is that documentation does not exist.
Correct.
So they have to start it from scratch, which adds time to the process.
My personal belief on that is nobody should have any documentation. There should be no Word documents, unless your control says, or your assessment procedure.
A lot of the CCIs, as you were pointing out, that have now been broken up, one says, what's your process? Is it documented? Are you keeping records? So as you say, it's very granular, but most speak to some kind of documentation.
Yes. So I consider when you fill out your answer in EMAS, that's documented. That's it. Now, if you need a process or a procedure, that's different. So what we do is we filter for anything that says process or procedure, and we tell the programs that's what you need. And then hopefully we have an example of where somebody else with an AWS cloud has an account generation procedure like DC2HS already does, and they can reuse that, change whatever they need to. Or you can even adopt somebody else's. Like everybody can adopt NMCIs if they want to, and just say, I follow that. And when you get audited, you just have to make sure that's what you're following. But you don't really have to put your own name on it. You just, to make it right, you just sign some memo saying that, yes, I follow that. But when you put it in your package and say, I follow this, that's what it means. So another fun thing I learned recently, I had not actually put a package together in RMF. It's kind of funny, like I did all the strategy stuff. So I finally did one once. And I realized that there are only 4 policies that are required. I know everybody puts all these other ones in there for AC, AU, MP, and blah, blah, blah.
Family documents.
Correct, the family documents. There's only 4 that are required. All the rest are covered by the Tier 1. If you look at the Tier 1 inheritance, they're already covered. They're .1s and .3 CCI or APs. And they all already exist. But everyone's making these documents because they think they have to. You could put that answer in the TR import in EMAS. It doesn't have to be in a separate Word document, which is too hard to maintain.
Okay, and then just a general comment that 99% of our packages at Corona are now under the FAO.
Congratulations.
Which has actually turned into quite the nightmare because now the backlog at the FAO is ridiculous. Yes.
Our FAO is great.
At least a year.
They're sitting there, so I'm going to say it.
But just to note that even though my ATO is signed by the FAO, there is now an ATUC process where I still have to send my stuff to the NAO, and they're going to review the package all over again, tear it apart, send it back for rework, or give me a whole bunch of stipulations that I will need to address.
And I think their talking points are their review is a much smaller review, but yes, they still do. And I'll tell you, you may not like this, I'm a huge defender of the NAO. The enterprise was entirely handled.
I miss the NAO desperately at this point.
Well, when that delegation thing came out, I very quickly sent an email to N2, N6, and .cao and said, do not move any NMCI packages. We're staying at the NAO. No, because we knew the NAO had been warning people for years about the ATUCs, that you can do this, but it's going to do this to you. And we couldn't. We have such a great relationship. They will agree to anything with you. You can work with them. Write down. We have separate strategies that they agree to. All these special things. I get all kinds of weird stuff. The SEA accepts test results from certain of my packages that are up to a year old. I have that agreement with them. I made the justification for it. They agreed. Not technology, by the way, they're buildings, so that's why, because our sites are just 4 walls, a roof, and a floor. But the rule was written as 90 days. We got Paul Herrig, Dr. Herrig, to agree to, it might actually be 9 months. I'm going to say a year. I think it's a year. But those kind of, the NAO and SEA will make all these kind of agreements with you and deals with you to try to make things easier for you. I would imagine the FAO would too, but I don't deal with the FAO. Somebody's saying no, they won't. I don't know if she's NAVC
and he's
also.
relatively new too, which is kind of adding to some of the issues, but. Okay, well, thanks.
All right, thank you. Yes, sir. All right, 2. That means I was a success. The worst is when nobody asks any questions. Oh, no, he didn't even ask a question. He's just leaving. I got cheated. All right. Anyone else? All right, well, I thank everyone for coming and sitting through this. Have a good day.